it's an established downtown that might be 100 years old, whatever. And so the idea is, how do you fit into that neighborhood and the established downtown so you look like you've been a part of that community and the fabric of that community for the past century?
Today, we're talking with Diana Melichar, owner and principal architect of Melichar Architects. Her firm has done extensive work for community FIs in branch construction and renovation. Diana shares how the customer experience can be enhanced or diminished by the design and execution of an institution's physical space. She also shares how abstract but really critical concepts like trust and stability can be rooted in a building's characteristics. There's lots to take away from our discussion, including the best practices for selecting an architect for your next branch program. Diana, thanks for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, branch expansion, branch renovation, it's always this, almost Solomon's choice type thing for a lot of community FIs, credit unions, community banks. I want to get into that, like the whole discussion about why and how to do it. But why don't we start? Just tell us a little bit about your background, your firm, why getting into, kind of like the local bank work. How did that kind of come about?
Sure. So, Rich, we have done a lot of work with manufacturers and smaller companies that have office facilities and things like that. But we also do hospitality work. And so that crossover made a lot of sense between hospitality and commercial work to get into the banking work, especially for these branch banks. In particular, we've done work for WinTrust. We've also done some work for Northern Trust Bank, which is another bank in our area. But the hospitality part is the part that's really key to having a good customer experience.
That element of, the completely different design criteria for your, the switch between like even like industrial, commercial, and retail, that idea of you are impacting how this person is going to view this brand, and it goes way beyond the functionality of it. What are some of the elements that you think are really key from that standpoint, particularly ones that are like not obvious, right? That kind of you find yourself having to twist clients' arms into to kind of really think about it from an important standpoint.
Yeah, that's funny. Twisting. So I've always said that good architecture is good for business. So we start from the outside and what attracts a client to come in and put their money in the bank. So it's really key that we have a good image and something that's welcoming to people. And then when we go the elements, when you get inside the bank, it has to do with how comfortable are they in placing their money in your hands. And in particular, when we've been working with the WinTrust banks, their focus is on community banking. So they came along in an era where there were banks that were closing up. They were maybe going into these historic downtowns or established towns where people remember what it's like to bank at their community bank, whether they're a farmer or whatever. And instead of that comfort level of going to the bank and not feeling like you're in some institution somewhere. Like, we don't like to be in hospitals. We don't like to be, and quite often a lot of the branch banks that are what I would call cookie cutter banks that have sprouted up, so like mushrooms across the country, they are much more antiseptic in their feeling. So the idea is that with our community bank, what do people relate to, and how do they feel comfortable? And then, of course, there's service is key, right? They're making a relationship with the commercial banker or with the retail banker, but they're doing this in an environment where the customer can relate to it. And so that's where the hospitality background comes in, because it feels not necessarily homey, but it feels when you walk into the bank, it's going to be more, um, it's going to be more individualized. So it's not like, you have the same corporate colors everywhere in the banks that we've designed. Is that
So I mean that's an interesting topic because a lot of the smaller community institutions, ones that are really tied to the community that are somewhat local in just the nature of how they work, they often say, yes, we are a bank, but we really trade and trust. Like that's what we do. And so that drives an awful lot of things from an operations standpoint with, how they do compliance with, how they compare themselves to other institutions. I mean, how does that idea of like conveying trust from what the building looks like what is it like
right?
that's a very fancy idea, but what does that actually like look like? What is it like? What's an
Right.
example of like tangibly like, oh yeah, here's an example of somebody who really did that well.
Yeah, exactly. I get it. It's all about safety, right? I got my if I'm the local person, and I want to put my life savings in the bank. What makes me feel safe? And what makes me feel protected? So when I see them, and I've seen, there are local banks with local branches, and they may have the architecture of the building maybe made out of wood and it looks more like a house or something. That doesn't convey safety as much as, let's say, a brick building or a stone building. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but they feel more safe. That and putting, and then of course um, having the proper vault and everything is really important too. But it's the idea of identifying with this branch in the first place and then feeling safe, and with having a more solid construction, they they want to put their money in the bank. So
So a lot of that turns into like design cues that you'll actually see as part of that. Things that you will like work into like a design with like that expressly in mind. Is that part of your process you kind of go through with clients?
well, so we again we're WinTrust would position their banks in a local downtown where there might already be, it's an established downtown that might be 100 years old, whatever. And so the idea is, how do you fit into that neighborhood and the established downtown so you look like you've been a part of that community and the fabric of that community for the past century in some way. So and so there were different banks that we did. Let's say like a Waukegan Community Bank. Waukegan was a town that was established over 100 years ago. That was a lakefront community near where we uh, where we're located, and it had a bustling commercial downtown. And we looked at the historic architecture that was there, and most of it's brick, and most of it's sort of boxy, and banks are typically boxy anyway. And so then we work with the language of the architecture that might be in that area and fit in so that the customer relates to that. They say, I feel comfortable in my downtown and my bank fits in with it. That makes sense.
So I guess like not being a weird eyesore, I guess would be another way to kind of say that term. That's probably derogatory to kind of say that as saying, well, it's a design choice,
Yeah.
one or the other. But this idea of there are elements of an institution's brand, maybe the longevity of how they've been there. There's many institutions we talk to that are 50, 60, some over 100 years old, and they rely on that idea that says, we've been here for multiple generations. So I guess I see your point about conveying that idea, conveying the longevity of where they've been, the stability of it, and we're planning to be here for another 100 years, right? Is kind of the implication there. Having that be more or less manifest in the building, in the parts that they see and touch and interact with.
Right. So another example would be we did a bank called McHenry Bank and Trust. That was a branch of a bank where the branch was actually on a busy highway. So the main bank is in the established downtown, but now we've got one of these corridors. It's got your big box stores. It's got a lot of things along the route. And how do you distinguish yourself on that route from? And meanwhile, a lot of these branches are springing up from the large banks that have that kind of institutional look. At McHenry Bank, what we did was we looked around and it's the clientele were primarily farmers, and I would say that would be the largest clientele, but and also the growing suburbia. We looked at what people could relate to there in terms of the historic architecture, and we said, okay, we know that the building actually works like a billboard along this heavily trafficked route. So the exterior has to be something that's attractive. And so we said, let's look and see what people relate to in the area. And we designed the building. It was a brick building, stone columns, sort of a classical approach. These are very conservative approaches, by the way. Nothing that's like space age or something like that. But people started coming in. They said, we want to put our money in here because we can relate to it, and they can see it by the roadside and say, this is different. This is different than, like I said, the big box stores and these other buildings that just, again, feel very institutional.
So how does your process work, working with a client, either, broadly in this area or specifically with banks? But it seems like it's more than just architectural principles and what makes good design. And, that there's things that kind of start to look more like the ethnographic anthropology, like we're actually going to do some primary research around this to kind of understand what's going to work, what's not. Just tell a little bit about what's it like to work with you on a project like this.
Sure. So every client has a project program, and a project program is their needs. How many bankers do they have? What size vault do they need? How many tellers do they want in the teller line? How many drive through? That kind of stuff. So that's all programmed. And we can fit those programmatic elements in any sort of what I would call dress clothing, right? So it's how we make that fit. Now, the community banks, what we found is that one of the project program items that has been really key for the WinTrust banks is that we also offer a community room of some sort. So they can use that as a training room. They can use it for large gatherings in their bank, whatever. But it's also, what we do is we have segmented off from the lobby a way for people to get into this community room so that they could have local Boy Scout troops, not-for-profit groups, other groups that could come and use the bank, as well as the customers. The other thing that we do is we've always provided a really nice lobby where people can, and the lobby is actually the banking, like a banking hall. Small, it's a small scale, but it's a place where I go and I have my cookie and coffee, and I might meet a friend and also deposit my money. So it's that hospitality aspect of it. And it's not just something that's in the corner. It's something that's front and center, that when people walk in, they feel really welcomed. And so those are some of the elements that we add to the sort of the banking mix of program. And then it's just a matter of how we cloak that building. Once we figure out the space planning of it, then it's how do we make it look beautiful from the outside so people can relate to it. And then whatever that design is, it carries through on the interiors, on the inside, because what you don't want to do is have, let's say, a traditional building on the outside, and you walk inside and suddenly it's super modern or something. Not that modern doesn't work, but we found that people typically like things that are more what we would call transitional in design, where it has a touch of contemporary, but there's still sort of traditional lines in the furnishings and the fixtures. And the other thing that we've done, Rich, is let's say at Waukegan Community Bank, um, the artwork that's on the walls is from local artists. Some of them happen to be a challenge in their mental capacities, but they make beautiful artwork. So that's on the walls. And other banks, we might have the local photographs of things that are happening in the community. So it all fits together in sort of an orchestrated environment where people feel really comfortable.
So the consistency in the experience, that there isn't anything particularly jarring about it going from one to the other, having to fit into, maybe the space that you've been given, what's around it, that aspect. I mean, that to be able to kind of juggle all these things in a way that is, I guess, at least aesthetically pleasing, if not maybe subconsciously offensive, right? To some level.
Right.
I get that this is, there's probably some mix of art and science between here. And well, what do you think? I mean, how much of this is, yeah, there's like a way you do this, and there's a manual about what this looks like, and some of it's embedded in building codes, et cetera, versus no. We're going to take a step back, and we're almost like painting a painting with how we're doing this. Like,
Right.
what's the balance between those two?
Sure. So design is really an empirical process. You start with these big ideas at the beginning, um, and I want all of these programmatic elements in my building. Um, we kind of mix that together in this alchemy, if you want to call it that, to come up with a preliminary design, and then we typically price out that, get a budget for the bank so they understand it. It may be that then if the budget seems a little high or they don't want to spend that kind of money, then maybe we're massaging the design some to make it work. But typically, we hit the nail on the head. So a lot of this, like you're saying, Rich, is just code requirements, and but there's some critical things there too. Uh, Sometimes we cut back on size because we don't want to have two escape egress stairs, like fire stairs in the building. That costs money, right? So if we can scale back on things or make the plan a little tighter, maybe we don't have to do that. Or if it's a one-story bank versus a two-story bank, we don't have to be providing an elevator, right? So those are all key features of things that we're looking at. I can say that creating these, I'll call them specialty banks, is certainly much more, there's much more of an investment in them, right? Because if you have one design of a large bank and you are replicating that in 200 locations across the US, then the cost to create this design is going to be far less because you're spreading it out over all of these banks. Um, there is an investment and there's a real intimate relationship between the bankers and the architect when they're creating these, what I would call specialty banks. And it is more expensive, but we've also found that these banks, because they attract so many customers, um, they become like the number one bank in the community because people want to go there. So there's an upfront investment in all of this, the construction, the design, because it's not an assembly line, right? It's these are single banks. Now there might be a couple of branches uh, that might look the same if they're like, if we go back to we did not do a second one in McHenry, the one that was on um, the highway, but it could be possible that there could be two of them, one on the north side of the town and one on the south side of the town, but they relate to the main bank, the main branch, because at least in our, if I go back to WinTrust, they have 15 chartered banks. So there's sort of a nucleus in each one of these charter banks in like the downtown area, and then they may have branches in other locations. Um, but even then, if the branch, let's say, is in a different town, then maybe that bank for that branch will be different. You know, have a
So
different flavor to it.
yeah, but maybe sharing some element of design language between them.
Correct.
So if you think through this process, right? Because this is not. I mean, there's certainly seasons to this where there's growth, et cetera, but or maybe even like acquisitions, and they're kind of thinking about a rebranding effort. But typically this isn't something that's done frequently or as a normal course of business for many institutions.
Wait.
And there's a lot of tension in this, right? It's not like you're building a data center or a call center for the mortgage business or something where it's like, oh yeah, no, it's X dollars per square foot, and it doesn't really matter what it looks like or where this has this element that, as you've said, there's stakes here in the execution of the whole thing. So for these smaller institutions, what are good criteria, or what is a good buying process? If you want to think of it from like questions to ask or the approach to take, but how should they go about finding the right firm to work with from a design or design build standpoint? What does that look like when that's done well?
Right. So I'm in total agreement with you, Rich. This is typically one of the largest investments that any client's going to make. Building is expensive, and it can be a fearful process if or it could go awry. It can go sideways. So you want to make sure that you do your homework right off the bat. And what I mean by homework is that you're going to be doing a lot of research into different architects and what they specialize in, because just like a doctor, there might be surgeons and there might be rehab specialists or whatever. So there are architects that specialize more in banking. So you start looking at that. Then you start looking at their portfolio. You'll see things on the website. You talk to previous clients, previous banks that may have used these architects. To really do your homework. And then I have to say that I really hesitate when people just go and they shop for price, because price is really a dangerous thing. If you want to see get some research from different contractors that may have built these other banks somewhere with these architects, because a good set of documents, a good set of construction drawings, which take time and effort, it takes a lot more time to design something up front than it does just designing a box and throwing some things in it. Because if you have a good set of documents, your construction documents are what a lot of people call blueprints. There are no blueprints anymore. They're white drawings with black lines. But if you have a good set of documents, that is your contract with your general contractor. So if you have, and there, a lot of times if you get the cheap guy, the cheap architect, there will be a lot less information on the drawings. And so you might as well open up your checkbook to the contractor, because there's a lot, there are blanks that are left open. And so there may be cost overruns. Oh, you didn't include that in the drawings. It's going to be extra for that. Oh, you didn't include that. Or even worse yet, it may be, well, I don't know. I don't have enough information on the drawings. The contractor's saying this. So I'm going to cover myself with uncertainties. So I'm going to escalate the price. So it's important that when you're looking at an architect, that you're not necessarily shopping around for price. You're looking for experience. You're looking for design abilities. You're looking for happy previous clients. You're looking for happy contractors. I know that takes time and effort. And in smaller towns, you'll find that architects may be multi-specialists. So like I know somebody who's in South Dakota, and they design airports, and they design jails, and they design homes, and they design all sorts of things. It's can they, and so they may have done a bank, they may not have done a bank, but they may be okay with that if they are good at solving problems and creating beautiful designs. So I wouldn't just throw out just because, you know, the architect hasn't done 12 banks. Um, it's just it's just a matter of doing research, and then you go and you interview them, see whether it's almost like having a marriage, right? Because it's very intimate in terms of the relationship of design. That the architect's going to listen to you, that um, and and you want to make sure that your contract is such that at any point, if the bank wants to get out of it, they can. If they say, "Oh boy," they do some preliminary design at the beginning, and they go, "This guy's hopefully this is the worst case scenario. This guy's not listening to us, and we don't like what we're looking at for what the preliminary design is, where you kind of figure out how the building functions and so the space layout and what it looks like, and typically the client would sign off on that, and then we start working into design development and construction drawings, and then into construction. So maybe worst case scenario, maybe there isn't a good fit. They get the preliminary designs and they go, boy, this is not what I had anticipated. You can cut the contract then and not have
So,
to execute things all the way through.
so this is like a lot of things where it's the type of service where there's a lot of variability in the market, and
Oh,
as you said, price may be an indicator of quality, but it may not be exactly an indicator of fit for what you're looking for what you're trying to do. So,
right.
I think that, just to go back to what you said, due diligence is going to be very important,
Mhm.
and almost like you're dating or you're getting married, right? You're kind of looking for somebody that's going to be able to take you all the way through that process. And it's interesting you kind of talk about the completeness at the design phase, because that gets there's a lot of parallels into that and kind of more like technology projects that we talk about more in the show, um,
Mhm.
because it's that committing to something, getting down the road, and then realizing, oh no, we didn't completely think through this, or there's a gaping hole that's going to cost us time, money. A lot
Mhm.
of times you get into compliance issues around this as well. So
Mhm.
that having walked down that path before with another similar client who's trying to do similar things or solve similar problems, like that's a good kind of rubric to kind of think through in all of
Mhm.
this. So
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
Dan, this has been great. You've shared a lot of like really interesting things here, a lot of things to take away from, and I know this is a recurring theme with a lot of our audience and a lot of our guests. Thinking about the investments going forward, how they think about their physical space, their retail space, tied to their
Mhm.
institution. So. If anybody's interested in learning more about you or your firm, where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, they could go to www.melichararchitects.com, and we have a complete website that would show the work that we do. And that's probably the easiest way to reach us.
Okay, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Okay. Yeah.
Diana, thank you very much for being with us today.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Rich.